Let's redesign some bad shiny Pokémon. This hardly needs any preface. As fans, we all know how painful finding a shiny Pokémon can be, yet so many of these elusive, exciting encounters turn out to be total duds in terms of appearance. Bad shiny Pokémon are not an easy problem to diagnose either. Some ruin amazing designs by incorporating unflattering color palettes that hurt the eyes, inexplicably changing a Pokémon to a garish, bright color that doesn't fit whatsoever, or perhaps the worst, great Pokémon that miss every opportunity to get even cooler and instead barely change to the naked eye. Naturally, I have my own ideas to fix many of these missed opportunities, so that's exactly what I did. Throughout the last month, I hosted many live streams where I hung out with many of you and fielded your ideas and suggestions to make some amazing recolored shinies using Dreamworld or Global Link artwork. We ended up with a pool of 20 new Pokemon that all got 3 new shinies each. Either a simple cosmetic tweak or more preferably, some kind of hidden meaning that I think shiny Pokemon ought to take on more. For example, how about a shiny Gengar that references the dark green tones of a World War II fighter plane? Or a golem that is bright and shiny to resemble a polished gold ore. That way we can celebrate and play off of the rich inspirations of all Pokemon. Of course, I had a lot of fun streaming and plan to continue hosting varied live streams where I perhaps do more Pokemon or Fakemon art projects, or maybe even showcase and discuss things I'm working on behind the scenes for my very own Fakemon region project, which marches closer and closer to completion. But for now, let's dive into some shiny Pokemon and see what we were able to fix. We'll start nice and simple with some popular requests. You'd be hard-pressed to find a Pokemon fan that actually likes Gengar and Garchomp's near-invisible shinies, so of course I had to start with these. The first idea for Gengar was to play off its Cheshire Cat inspirations with a much more vibrant color palette. Too bad Gengar's body is monochromatic, so we couldn't have purple stripes, but I think yellow eyes on pink is striking enough and gets the point across. The next idea was also very cat-like, a nice dark gray to look like a black cat or Russian blue, with some neat radioactive green eyes to showcase its poison typing, also looking like realistic cat eyes. Personally, this one was my favorite, but chat really wanted to see its Mega's shiny colors on the standard version, which I think looks pretty cool as well, and who doesn't like a pure white shiny? For our first Garchomp variant, I was asked to give it Sharpedo's exact colors, which I think not only looks great, but does make sense, given that these Pokemon are most likely related biologically. The Gold Star really gets the point across, and I think this is a great example of a more restrained shiny. The second one was a bit more wild, and surprisingly turned out to be my favorite, Beta Garchomp's colors. That shade of red is really unique, and the sandy beige body really showcases the ground typing. Am I the only one who forgets this Pokemon is part ground sometimes? And lastly, this very unique shade of green, as one of my viewers excellently suggested, was a reference to the P-40 Warhawk fighter plane. You know, those old planes from World War II that have the painted shark face on the front? It's very clever, but I'm not crazy about the colors on an aesthetic basis. It is a cool tie-in, and a design philosophy that you'll see we strive for throughout this video. Shinies with meaning. Next up was Como-O, a shiny that I'd never seen before that was suggested for this series, and I think I was better for it. There was truly nowhere to go but up from here. So we made a nice series of 3 similar but equally conceptual shinies. The first was Minty Green Scales, inspired by oxidized copper, which I think is unique and personally my favorite, but I always like something green. The next was a darker red meant to look like lava rocks, which I think works great for its habitat and Hawaiian origins, but it does feel a little more generic to me. Finally, a baby blue and yellow one to reference Sun and Moon, the base games that this Pokemon debuted in. Very clever. All 3 of these are neat in the sense that they're very restrained. They just have a simple color swap to the scales and a darker body that makes this look less like a vibrant and unnatural shiny, and more so just like an alternative variation that this Pokemon could come in, which I think is realistic and pretty neat. Now, I generally enjoy Espeon's lime green shiny, in part because it's iconic, but it was heavily requested on stream, so here we are. The first variation was my favorite, giving it Umbreon colors, which I think looks incredible. It's a shame Umbreon's shiny is already so great that I couldn't justify touching it, otherwise this would have made a great pair. The second variant was my viewers tasking me with giving this Pokemon much more muted, earthy colors to look like the sand and the gems common in ancient Egyptian iconography and artifacts, something that I agreed was fitting for this Pokemon's general vibe. And finally, I decided a third idea could be giving this lighter blue and gold to look like a Hamsa. You know, those 5-fingered hand amulets with the eye in the middle, common in many Middle Eastern cultures. While I liked the idea, I was underwhelmed with the outcome. Ultimately, at least I think the Umbreon version was better than the real shiny, so good work all around. Ursaring was another Pokemon due for an upgrade on this basis of, why is it Nickelodeon Slime Green? Although I definitely think this one is much more needed than Espeon, because this shade of green is not it. Our first version was to reference its evolved form Ursaluna, with the blood red and the peat brown. I think this looks pretty cool, a nice way of making an edgier shiny without it going overboard. However, I think this cream and gold is perfect for a honey bear, which I think is my personal favorite after looking at it for long enough. It's very cozy looking. And finally, we wanted to just make it look like another kind of real life bear, a panda. But given the markings, it ends up kind of looking monochromatic, which isn't really bad at all. But do you consider any of these an upgrade over the real shiny? Archon is a shiny that you probably have never thought of unless you were shiny hunting for it, but it's a good example of taking a Pokemon with a great color palette and making its shiny slightly more burnt looking, just a little bit meaningless and ugly. So for our first Archon, how about a nice pair of brown, gold, and green to look like classic dinosaur colors? It is a fossil Pokemon after all, and this makes it look much more natural and prehistoric. The second was an interesting idea that I wish Pokemon did more of. Adding no new colors, but instead alternating the existing ones and their placement on the body. So what is now red is blue, and so forth. It was through this that we quickly realized that this is also a clever reference to the Kansas Jayhawks, for all of you basketball fans. Or Kansas residents, I suppose. The third one was my favorite. We decided that since Archon is confirmed to be the ancestor of all bird Pokemon, what if its shiny had the direct colors of a modern Unova bird? We picked the memorable pink, green, and gray of Unpheasant, which I thought looked phenomenal on both a conceptual and an aesthetic level, a color pairing that I never thought would work. This set is why I loved doing these streams so much. What began as a redesign to a shiny that I'd never even seen turned into my favorite set of 3 variants in this whole video, and a newfound appreciation for this unique Pokemon. One shiny I knew I had to tackle off screen was Parasect. This shiny is just a bit underwhelming and not at all memorable, and I think it goes without saying that such a creepy concept deserves something a bit more thematic and striking. So I decided to make this pale zombie and glow-in-the-dark spot shiny, which I instantly fell in love with. Just changing the colors on the spots because of how much I like the base concept. Personally, I think neon green looks the best, but I don't think there's a bad one here. Truly a hit. Now, of course, we had a few Pokemon that were suggested because their shinies just aren't for everyone. I would have trouble saying they're objectively bad. These two were almost opposite examples. Some believe Tyranitar's shiny is just a bit too muted and desaturated, whereas Crobat's isn't the most popular because of its lime green and pink colors, which some believe clash similar to Como-O's. So for Tyranitar, we made a variant based on the modern depiction of Godzilla in those Godzilla vs. Kong movies, a navy blue with an almost radioactive blue belly. This one I thought was cool, obsidian black with a striking red belly, referencing a blood diamond. It's very menacing, but I can see why some people might think this is way too edgy and generic. Despite how cool and popular red and black shinies are, I can agree that they're a bit overdone. And finally, this last one was clever. How about a gold body and silver belly to reference Tyranitar's debut games Gold and Silver? This was my favorite, and I can see it being equally enjoyable if you were to swap it so it was a gold belly on a silver body instead. But I think going overboard with gold is cooler, and just more fun if I'm being honest. For Crobat, we tried to tone down its original shiny by simply giving it inverted colors like its pre-evolution in Zubat and Crobat. I actually like this one a lot more than I thought I would. Next up, we knew that we had to make a Batman variant. A nice shade of bluish gray and yellow wings like the 60s suit of the Caped Crusader. And finally, the rule of cool struck once again, if I'm being honest, as we made a black and red one that I really liked. Of course, this has some sensible meaning to it, as it does reference vampires and Dracula, to be fair. Now, Golem was an interesting one. Another shiny that I'd never really thought of, but my viewers were adamant that its monochromatic brown was not a flattering look. First up was a great concept that I'm not sure landed. Asphalt gray rocks with a bright yellow body to look like a painted road. Chat was very split on this one. Next, a ruby red one with an off-white body to reference a Pokeball or a Premier Ball, as it is ball-shaped after all. I kinda like how switching the rocks to red also makes them look more gem-like rather than rock-like. And speaking of which, chat had the great idea of making a solid gold variant. Kinda like Tyranitar, but doing something unique. Lightening the main body to almost white and having the shaded bits be the gold. Now this gives the impression of a very shiny and reflective surface almost like a disco ball, or a very bright golden ore. I wasn't sure if this was allowed, especially in the 3D model era. But then I remembered that there is precedent for shinies completely changing the texture of a Pokemon in a sense. In Generation 9 we have Rellor, who takes a standard ball of dirt and turns it into a true golden ore in its shiny, so that made me feel like this Golem was justifiable. and because of that, it ended up far and away being my favorite. Why doesn't every rock-type Pokemon have a golden shiny? Pikachu fits into the category of Gengar and Garchomp, another beloved Pokemon with a nearly invisible shiny. I knew that I had to do right by the electric mouse, so here we go. My viewers suggested that we try out Marill colors, a nice classic blue and red color scheme that I think looks alright. Minor nitpick, but I generally dislike red and blue when they're juxtaposed on top of one another directly, like the ear tips here. I think they always kind of look better when given white as a separation, like many world flags or sports emblems. But I do think that this looks pretty charming, and I love referencing the original Pika Blue. The second variant was an attempt to reference Alolan Raichu, a very distinct and burnt orange, brown, and cream. I really enjoy this one, and it feels like a very realistic shiny that Pokemon would do, almost like an improved version on the real Pikachu shiny. But my personal favorite was an idea that I was set on, and chat seemed to like as well, a desaturated green to reference what Pikachu looked like when viewed on the original Game Boy screens. These pale colors are very nostalgic, and seems like a good throwback. I think it would be pretty cool to see these analog hues on the modern 3D model, but what do you think? Now for a much more modern Pokemon, how about Cyclizar? This shiny is very ugly in my opinion. Not much more to say about that. So the obvious first two choices were to give it Koraidon and Miraidon colors. It was a bit of a challenge, as these legendaries have far more colors than you would think, so some simplification was required. But I think these both turned out beautifully, Miraidon especially in my opinion, and chat agreed. Given the counterpart nature of the first two variants, we struggled to find a justifiable concept for a third. So just for fun, we tried to do what we did with Archon by just inverting the colors that we already have. We did this by taking all the most prominent colors and making them less prominent, so the green was swapped with orange, and the same with the black and the grayish green dark color on the saddle. This one actually turned out pretty great too. It feels pretty subtle. And more importantly, I think we can agree all three forms here are vast improvements over the original shiny. Now, I love grass-type Pokemon, and I think it's a huge shame that many of them have weak shinies. You have the obvious slam dunk to just give them a seasonal palette change almost every time. So to illustrate this concept, I decided to take two of my favorite grass types, both of whom have weak shinies and would benefit from improvement, Gogoat and Leafeon. I did the same thing for both of them all three times, but varied the colors for each to suit the individual Pokemon. We began with a nice spring color palette, then autumn, which I think I like the most on paper, but I wish I softened the colors a bit to avoid so much harsh contrast with bright orange and brown. And finally winter, which I think was the best overall. I love the frostbitten minty look that I gave Leafeon. Very unique. While I think winter suited Gogoat, almost reindeer-like. Again, you could do this theme with almost every single grass type Pokemon, and it would be an interesting variant, even if the shiny isn't bad. I would love to see a Snover that has a spring, summer, and fall variant, for example. Now, on this topic of providing multiple variants to serve as our three options, how about Vanillix? This Pokemon I think is charming enough to warrant a shiny that references different types of ice cream rather than some nondescript palette shift. So I went ahead and made a chocolate, mint, and strawberry variant that I think are all very cute. I like the strawberry one the best, surprisingly, given how unique pink and brown look together when done right. But the chocolate chip one is also kind of nice in its simplicity. I think I would genuinely enjoy this Pokemon so much more if it functioned like this, where it had multiple flavor variants similar to Alchemy. So in lieu of shinies, consider these form changes. Or for the sake of this video, just pick your favorite flavor of these three options, and consider that one the true shiny. Many Pokemon come in trios or counterpart pairs, so I think it makes sense if their shinies reflected this. To illustrate this concept, I made a shiny Seviper that looks like Zangoose, and a shiny Zangoose that looks like a Seviper. Personally, I thought going in that I would love the dark navy and gold Zangoose far more, but my god, white Seviper with those scarlet spots is just gorgeous, and those black accents really make it pop. A white shiny is very rare, and pink is never bad, so long as it's paired with the right colors. And it seems like both chat and a YouTube poll that I released agreed that this Seviper redesign was incredible. I don't regret making a counterpart palette swap, and I would love to hear your ideas as to which counterparts could benefit from this. All in all, what do you think? Do you think I made some shinies that are clearly better than their original versions? I would love to hear your thoughts. Also, please don't hesitate to let me know what other Pokemon you would like to see me tackle in a second edition of this video in the future, but that is something that I can only do with enough of your suggestions, and of course this video doing well, so comment away. And be sure to subscribe and join my community Discord so you never miss a stream from me, and if you feel inclined, please consider joining my Patreon to support my Fakemon region project. I share updates on my Discord and on stream here and there, and I can promise you it'll be well worth the wait when that series finally premieres on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time for more content.